Hello, everybody. This is Gorka with All-American-Bigways,
And Doug Barron here as well.
and welcome back to another chapter of Big Wave Fundamentals. In this online chapter consisting of 5 chapters, today we're covering exits. The Let's go over what are we going to be covering today. First, Doug is going to take us through airplane fundamentals and exit fundamentals, and what do we need to keep in mind? What are the most important things that we need to keep in mind every time we exit the plane, no matter the slot and no matter the plane? Second, we're going to go into our plane slotting. We realized that we had started introducing the concept of nomenclature of different slots and different planes in the prior chapter, and we're going to dive a little deeper into that. Then we're going to cover floating exits, and we're going to stick to the most typical exits used here in the United States, which are the tailgate, usually the Skyvan or the Casa, and then the side door floating exits, usually the Otter, although it can be any other airplane as well. Then we're going to move on to dive-in exits, also for both types of aircrafts, and then we'll be covering base exits.
All right, moving into exit fundamentals. So there's a few key concepts here. Your first, it's going to start with your position in the door. How are you going to be set up? Where are you going to be set up in relation to the door? Uh, Obviously, the floaters are going to be in the door. Then you'll have the first row divers, the second row divers, and then the divers from there. The next thing we're going to think about, and these are all the concepts that we talk about, regardless of your exit position, but what we want to think about when you're exiting the aircraft. So your position in the door is number one. Presentation as you're stepping off the aircraft, so presenting into the wind, where the relative wind is coming from. And just so if we can get an understanding, if an airplane is flying like this, like into the camera, that means the relative wind would be coming straight at my face. And I want to think of presenting my shoulders and my hips into the relative wind as I'm stepping off the aircraft. And that may change based on your position in the door, right? If you're floating, if you're diving, if you have a tailgate exit, those are all different things. But the concept of presenting into the relative wind is the most important. And then your timing based on when you're going to leave the aircraft. If you're in the lead aircraft, then it would be off the count of the base. If you're one of the trail aircraft, where when you see someone step off the lead aircraft, whether it be a super floater or a videographer or the base come off the aircraft, your timing when you're leaving the aircraft. And then the next thing is, excuse me, your placement outside of the door. So for the floaters, especially when you're floating on a trail aircraft, where you're trying to place yourself as you exit the aircraft. Same thing with the first 2 rows of divers inside that floating air or that trail aircraft. We're going to get into that stuff later, but essentially it goes from your position in the door, presentation into the relative wind, your timing, and then your placement where you're placing yourself outside the aircraft.
All right, so we talk about who's diving, who's floating, and a lot of times even before we go over exits, even when we're walking a dive, we use a nomenclature of a letter and a number to designate a specific slot for a specific person, right? So if I tell you that you are C5, you know that your aircraft is aircraft C, which, based on the content that we covered in the prior chapter, would be the third aircraft from the left. If there's 5 aircrafts, then that would be the lead plane. But what does 5 mean? The overall theme of the numbering is relative to the door. The closer to the door you are, the lower the number is. The higher the number is, the more of a later diver you are. And so I have 2 examples here of what it would be. Again, this may depend on the organizer and how the organizer wants to do things, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to find something similar to what you're looking at. If we are using a trail plane, on the left-hand side, you have a tailgate or a Skyvan or, let's say a Casa. And on the right-hand side, side door, most likely an Otter. And so if we start with the tailgate, we start with the tailgate. We would see one, two, three immediately close, essentially like right on the door, right from the left to the right. And these people would be looking towards the pilot and back to the tailgate. 4, 6, 7. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we have a red line that we essentially use for spacing. Just based on pilot consideration of where the center of gravity is, we don't want to load the back of the aircraft too heavy. And so we leave a spacing there. And then after that comes 9, 10, 11, 12, et cetera, et cetera. On the trail side,
It,
yeah, go ahead.
Yep. I'm just going to say in this diagram, this has 8 people on the gates, depending on the aircraft that you're in, depending on the tailgate. Sometimes you come in up to 10, but that will all be distinguished and determined before you get on the aircraft. So this has 7, 8 here. It could have 9 and 10 as well. Again, it all depends on the aircraft here. But just like Orca is saying, there will be a red line in those aircraft where we have to keep some of the people behind it for the CG of the aircraft.
And it will also, another factor that will depend on how many people, how many jumpers we can fit in there, is whether or not we have a videographer. Very similar to like in usually in the lead plane, we would have a videographer, but in the trail plane we may or we may not. That would potentially free up one more person to be on the outer side of that red line. On the Otter side, it would be very similar in terms of the closer to the door, the lower the number is. And so 1 through 5, normally, sometimes we put 4 people, sometimes we put 6 people if we can fit them. But normally 1 through 5 would be outside with their right foot on the door and holding onto the bar. And then 6, 7, 8 would be the first line of people inside. Then 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then we actually create 2 different rows of divers. And we do this because it's actually more efficient. It allows it decreases the distance for 19, 20, 21, and 22. The distance that they have to run to get out through the door. And it allows number 19 to actually accelerate as number 18 is running out and leaving the plane. It kind of changes their timing. But the idea is the same, right? The idea is, well, if I'm number 6, where am I going to go? Again, depending on how many people we're putting, but you know that you're relatively close to the door. If we're thinking about a lead plane, the concept is basically the same, but we got to know where the base is, right? And so this is this is another example. For the lead Skyvan, the lead plane, usually the Skyvan, we're probably just gonna have a chunk in there, an A-way chunk, and we'll cover base exits later with the videographer. And then from then on, we'll leave that gap that we were just talking about previously, and then divers after that. If we have a lead aircraft that is a side door, we normally exit a diamond, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of the time, we don't even exit linked, and we free fly the exit, what it's called, where everybody leaves on their own. But this would be a fairly typical example of something that you would see. Again, the idea is the same. 1 through 4. In this case, we're only pulling 4 people outside, because sometimes the organizer likes to do that so there's more space for the base to get out, but there could be 5. If there were 5 people, then we would put number 5 in outside of the door, and then everything inside would just go up a number, right? And we would just decrease the number, we would decrease the distance that the last diver would have. Okay, so now that we know the exit laws, Doug, if I B11, does that mean that I should be ready to dive, or that I should be ready to float?
Uh, Likely you're going to be diving if it's B11. And just to go back real quick, Orca, just to give a quick summary of that. Essentially, if it's a tailgate aircraft, it's going to start on the left, closest to the tailgate, and count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Blah blah. Continue. And then in the side door aircraft, it will count from the front of the door backwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I know that we covered that, but just to say that, because sometimes I have seen other people use different nomenclature. This is a nomenclature that we use, and that is more common, I'm pretty sure. But just so rule of thumb, from the left hand to the right, starting at 1, from the front of the door back, starting at 1. There you go. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep. So let's say that I'm D11 or I am B11. How does that change my exit?
If you're B or D11, okay. So, that would be based on the timing, and you're leading me into this next segment here. Okay, here we go. So based on exit slotting, we have this awesome diagram that Gorka kind of put together here. So if you look, these are all a right trail configuration, and obviously it would not be a formation like this. We would, disperse the aircraft accordingly, but just for example purposes, this is at time 0. So you see the T is 0 and everybody is outside the aircraft, or everybody's on the aircraft ready to exit. And then as we move into the exit starting, you can see T is 0.5, so like half second out the door. You can see that teal color is the floaters stepping off the aircraft, and they would be floating in their relationship. So there would be a floating approach and exit position to the base, which is in black there. Then as we get into T is 1 second there. You can see now in the C and D aircraft, the first row of divers, as they're coming off, they're still in a floating position based on their relationship to the base. The first right trail aircraft is more of a straight in approach to the base, right? So they're not really diving or floating. Essentially, the base is going to be right across line of flight for them as they're stepping off. And then as we can continue, you can see now in the Charlie aircraft, the C aircraft, now their second row is their more straight in black. And then if we go to the B aircraft, now their second row is a little bit more diving. The A aircraft, we have divers coming out. And if we look into the C aircraft, as we continue, their second row is still in a floating position. Now, as we move into the time 2, whatever that means, 2 seconds essentially, we see more divers from the B aircraft, the C aircraft, and now the D aircraft is getting into straight across. So what we're trying to show you here is that just because you are in a diving position in the aircraft, so inside the aircraft, that doesn't mean that your approach is necessarily a diving approach. So if you're a later trail aircraft in the formation, the first 1, 2, 3 rows of divers set up in the door could actually still have a floating approach into the formation based again on their position relative to the base as they step off the aircraft. And we can kind of give the two outlier scenarios. So imagine somebody falls off the lead aircraft early and everybody goes and the base hasn't left. Everybody's floating at that point, right? If the airplane's empty and the base hasn't left and everybody's out, everybody's floating. If the base leaves and no one leaves, and then everybody realizes it later, like, oh shoot, everybody left, then everybody's diving. So the moral of this is that your position in the door doesn't necessarily mean it's your approach to the formation. So if you're later in the aircraft positioning, that could mean that if you are number 9 or 10, you could still be a floating position to get to the formation in your approach. And it's all based on your relative position to the base when you step off the aircraft. Is that what we're trying to get at?
So if I can add, basically what it means is whether or not you're floating or diving, it depends on 2 factors. Number 1 is your relative position to the door, as Doug has mentioned, right? The farther in we are, the more likely we are to dive. And the farther out, closer to the door, the more likely we are to float. It also depends on the airplane positioning, right? And we normally try to execute things according to plan. But let's say that the aircrafts are actually the trail aircraft is right behind the lead aircraft, but it's not below. It's actually on the same level. Then likely nobody's floating because the position of the aircraft doesn't allow for anybody to flow up to the stadium. Everybody would be essentially diving. Even if you have a floating exit position, you would have a diving approach. right? So those are the two factors that kind of shape that up. And if we look at how airplane positioning would impact how many people are diving versus how many people are floating, look at this diagram, right? So person number 8, for instance, could be floating or diving depending on which aircraft they're on, because B is a lot closer to the lead aircraft than D is. D is a lot lower, so it is likely that D8 would be floating, whereas B8 will have a more straighting shot. Okay? Now, as Doug has mentioned, that is just the plan. If things don't go according to plan, all of that could be changed depending on the timing, the base's timing of exit,
Hmm.
the time of the base.
And then it goes back to the same things. It goes back to your presentation, identify where the base is, where your line of flight is, and then moving into your radial from there. These, again, just like Orca said, these are all the theoretical applications. And when we go through the slotting of the formation, this is all the things that we take into consideration on where people are going to be placed after they leave the aircraft in relation to the base so that they can have the most efficient approach into the formation.
All right. Well, now that we've covered that, let's actually cover everybody in teal, floating exits. We're first going to cover the tailgate floating exits. So let's start before we exit. What is our door position? Well, I kind of already mentioned this when we were going over the diagram, but we're going to be back to the door, looking towards the cockpit. Heels close to the edge, essentially just ready to leave. If you've never done this exit, it may be a little scary. You may feel like you're gonna fall off. You won't fall off. And the usually the easiest way to bring your heart rate down and to make sure that you don't fall off is to put your arms up either on the bar or the rig of the person in front of you, depending who it is. If it's a let's say, and we're actually going to see an example of a video example of this later on. Let's say that we have 3 floaters on the Skyvan and is a lead aircraft with a 4-way base that runs out, then we can kind of have our hands gently on the rig of the person in front of us. If let's say that it's a trail aircraft, whether that is a left trail or a right trail, and the base is not in our aircraft, we're likely going to be holding on to the bar if we can reach. If you're sure that you can't reach, then you could just do the same thing as we said and put your hands in front of on the person in front of you. Okay. Uh, Timing can vary, but it's usually before the base leaves, right? If it's a lead aircraft, it's easy because we're seeing the base run out and we're just stepping off right before them, right? Usually the timing would be with the organizer's count on someone's count. If it's a trail aircraft, the time we can't really see all that well. The way, for instance, someone who is outside of the Otter would be able to see. We don't have that visibility. And so normally we have a person in the front of our own aircraft, looking through the window, seeing when the first person steps off the lead aircraft. Okay. Um, and then placement, which is probably the most important, we're going to want to jump straight backwards, right? We're going to essentially imagine that you're stepping off a chair and hopping down to the floor. Chest high, arms high. Now, here's the biggest difficulty when it comes to tailgate floating. If you think about this is the floor or the aircraft, this is us standing here, and we're flying in this direction, right? We're flying here. The moment we step off, the wind is going to hit our legs first. That comes with a difficulty, right? If we exit the Otter, for instance, it's sort of like the left side hits the wind before the right side, but pretty much chest and legs are all hitting the wind at the same time. That doesn't happen on the tailgate exit. So, which means that 2 things. Number 1 is anticipation. We have to be ready for that, right? And know how to counteract that. The easiest way to do that is to bring our arms high to counteract when we continue falling and the wind hits our lower body. If we have our arms up, it will also just a tad later hit our upper body, and it will put us in a good position. If we don't have our arms high, what happens is, and we're actually going to see this in a couple of videos, is that it puts that person sort of, we call it head into the wind, essentially on a head down, close to free fly or angle type of position. Okay. Um, and then the third is just be strong. Just anticipate that and be strong. Know that it's going to happen. Be okay with it, and don't have your legs out just yet. The more legs out that we have at the very beginning, if our body hasn't hit entirely the wind, we're not ready to fly just yet. And if we have our legs all the way out, that's just going to help this kind of position that we don't want. And so just exit in a neutral body position, arms high, and then when we hit the wind, now we go legs out, trucking up the hill towards the base or towards the stadium. So let's see an
Can I?
example. Yep, go ahead.
I just want to say one thing about the position in the door for the floaters. Gorka mentioned this briefly, but sometimes, and my videographer associates will appreciate this. Trunk, Elliot, OB, Charlie, all those guys. Remember that if you're floating on the lead aircraft, or if you're floating in one of the tailgate trail aircrafts, if there's 3 floaters, there could be a videographer there as well. So just because you guys have gotten in your position in the door, don't forget that there may be a 4th person back there with you. Sometimes they get forgot about back there, and then they're like, hey, what about me? OB is one to say, no, there's actually 4 of us back here, not just 3. So remember about where you're positioning, and talk to the videographer as well about where he or she will be placed.
Yeah, so let's actually see an example, right? In this case, this is actually 3 floaters on a lead aircraft that happens to be a Skyvan. The base is running out, and we have a row of 3 people leaving with them, right? That you can sort of kind of see this person in the black jumpsuit has their arms up, just like we talked about. And as we step off, boom, we are here. So, okay, let me freeze it at that moment. Look at person number 1 and person number 3 have their arms up, and their position into their presentation into the wind is a lot better than person number 2. Why? Because this person has started tracking up too soon. We go into head into the wind, just like we talked about, right? So remember, first, neutral body position and arms up. Second, legs out, track against the wind. But we can't skip steps. All right, so that is floating of the Skyvan. Let's move on to the side door. Um, the basics are very, very similar, and they go back to what Doug has said. Presentation is the most important. It literally fixes everything. Placement can be off, and timing can be off. If presentation is good, you're more likely to have a better exit than if you get the other 2, but you don't get presented. Generally, because we are, in terms of timing, because we're floating, we leave before the base. Normally, if we're on the outside, we would usually see the lead aircraft leaving, and that's sort of like our timing, whether there's a super floater or a videographer, or it's actually the main organizer setting line of flight. Be strong when leaving the plane. Also, know that you might get initially uneven presentation. It's very crowded. You may get into a little bit of a bump or grind. That's okay. Be ready to fly through that. And then as soon as we hit the plane, as soon as we get presented, as soon as we are ready to fly, just like with the tailgate example, be ready to track up and get over the base onto a stadium. Remember, we don't float to the base, or to the formation. We float to the stadium, so that then we can have a stadium approach. In chapter 3, we'll talk about the stadium and the radials and the exit frame of that. But we wanted to introduce that concept here.
One thing for floating side door aircraft, just like Orca said, you're going to be stacked up on top of people like this. If somebody's underneath of you, that usually means they left in front of you. So primarily, they're going to need to be to your left side. So if it's like this, that person is going to move over here. So just gently help assist as long as we have good presentation, just like Orca said, if they move over to your left side, then that will give them clean air. And that's the position or the placement that they need to be in outside the aircraft.
Yep. So how do we climb out? Very, very similar standard operating procedure for big ways than we would do for A-way or any kind of group jumping, which is we go from the outsides, right? So first number 1 and then videographer, then number 2 and 5, then number 4 and 3. Remember to exit with your rig through the center of the door so that we don't bump the pin or the hacky or any part of our gear on the door frame. The door position, you kind of saw a picture right before here. So we want to be right foot against the door, left foot down. There are some exceptions to this, and holding the bar with our right. If there is an outside bar, we will ask you to take the outside bar. And that is just because it leaves more space for the people inside. Right leg bent a little bit. We have, especially number 1 and number 2 on exit, have to essentially release a lot of energy and jump off and launch pretty hard. So we're going to want to set our timing according to that. And we're going to want to not be with our leg completely straight, because if that's the case, then it's very unlikely that we could launch successfully. Eyes up looking at the formation. And then if you see someone leaving from the lead aircraft, go ahead and leave. The
For
other...
the timing, sorry,
Yep.
can I talk about something?
Yep.
For the timing, I see this quite a bit that I've seen floaters say, oh, well, the person in front of me didn't leave. Like all 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, 7 floaters, however many are outside the aircraft, you're essentially all independent and you all need to be looking up there. And if you see someone leave the aircraft, go. Don't wait. Like, oh, well, the person in front of me didn't leave. Like, well, then that's on them. You need to make sure that everybody's eyes up, ready to go, just like Gorka said, leg coiled, ready to go, jump off the aircraft. And everybody is making their own decision that once you see someone step off or whatever the timing may be, because the aircraft timing may be different with super floaters and things like that. Like once you see that person leave, then get off the aircraft.
Yep. When it comes to timing, we're all independent. Let's now talk about placement. So when we exit the side door, again, most likely on Otter, if we were exiting a Caravan, we probably wouldn't be able to put as many people outside. But here in the United States, the trail plane, the side door plane that we use most often is the Otter. Let's assume that we're putting 5 people outside. We're gonna go for some type of a diagonal type of placement, where number 1, who is the front floater, is launching most up and away, and then from down to number 5, who is essentially dropping down. So the front floater is going to have, like I said, going to have to launch pretty hard, up, forward, and away. Why forward? Because you're catching the wind for everybody else behind you. So the wind is going to want to push you back immediately the moment you step off. So we actually, when I have that slot, I try to essentially like tackle the airplane wing if I could. You're never going to get there. You're never going to get there. So it helps a lot for the people that are behind you if we launch forward, because if we don't, and we don't get far away enough, then what happens is we're actually taking everybody with us when we leave. Actually one more thing, and that actually your ability to launch and how much you have to compress on your right leg may actually change your timing. What do I mean by this? Well, we still want to leave on go, right? As Doug said, we're all independent. And whether we have to compress or not doesn't change that. We want to leave on go. So if I can see, sometimes you can't. If you can't, then you can't anticipate it. But if you can see, and I would say 8 out of 10, depending on airplane placement, you can see the count. If we have if we have a tailgate, it's actually and the pilots are doing a good job. It's actually rather easy to see the base stepping back, and then the organizer do the entire count. If you can see that, you can anticipate when go time is and start compressing earlier so that you can actually leave on go. Okay, that probably goes also for 2, 3, and 4, but it's less important for them than it is for 1 because they require less of a launch. Number 2, the second floater is also going up, forward, and away. Now, the third floater is just essentially like launching sideways. And number 4 is essentially think about stepping off a chair that you're stepping sideways, right? So you're kind of like going down, but also to the side. Okay. And then number 5 is just literally straight down. We'll see a video of just number 5 in a second. All right. So first, I want to show you a video of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Um, it also goes without saying that this is what we plan for. It doesn't necessarily mean that we always execute that plan. And so what you're going to see, the video that you're about to see will show certain aspects of this being done, but not all of them. And so that's why I want to show a couple of different videos for that. And then, sorry, before I show you this video, I did wanted to show what we go for number 6, 7, and 8, which are we wrongly call them the first line of divers. They're likely not to be diving at all. They might have a straight in approach, or if they're in a plane that is very far and very below compared to the lead plane, they may actually also be floating, just like we went over the diagram that Doug was talking about. So if we look at a video of number 1, 2, 3, and 4, this is actually not a trail plane. This is actually a lead plane. And the main organizer, we actually have 6 people outside. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But the timing, it really doesn't change much in terms of the placement that we are going for. It just means that we're asking all of the floaters, 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 to leave before the organizer so they can actually float. Because if they're leaving with the organizer, they're not really floating. And so the placement on a diagonal that we're going for here is very much the same as it would if it were a trail plane. Okay. And we can see right off the bat, number 1, 2, 4, and 5 have done this sort of horizontal separation very well. We can also see that the presentation from 1 and 2 is really good. And they get with their arms up, ready to truck up and float up to the formation. We can see number 4 struggling with presentation, and then number 5 makes the same mistake that we were seeing on the tailgate exit prior, which is heading to the wind just a little too soon. We would have benefited from having our arms up just a little bit longer. And then number 6, we just wanted them to step down, which doesn't really happen. They step to the left. You can kind of see here a little too much. So now I'll show you a video of what that number 5 or number 6 straight down exit should look like. But I wanted to show this. See how far away number 1 is here. That's what we're going for. This allows everybody to have clean air and avoids a rodeo. If we don't get far enough away from the aircraft, then we will be flying on top of each other. Okay.
Imagine that you're like starting a race, like a track race, and you're running on a track, and everybody has their lanes that you're trying to be in. Now you're putting that against the aircraft and opening that up for everybody to have their own lane to be in as they're stepping off.
Yeah, different jump, same event, actually, different formation. But we're going for a couple of things that I wanted to emphasize here. Number 1 is if there is an outside bar, in this case, there isn't for 1 through 4. We can see there is no outside bar here, but there is for the videographer. This person is taking the bar, and that is allowing them actually to be a lot farther back, which allows to clear more space for number 1 through 4. Okay. For that reason, they have their left leg instead of their right leg. So this is an exception where having a left leg would actually allow you to be farther back. We would want to do that. And the right leg is just essentially trailing, just in the wind, ready to fly. And as the first person steps off the aircraft here, we're exiting and we're dropping straight down, kind of like parallel to the fuselage, down, without stepping away at all. So that's kind of the launch that we're going for in here.
Mhm. In that position, if that person does have their left leg in the back of the door, remember that the first thing you need to do as you step off the aircraft is present. Very commonly, people will try to push with their right in that configuration and it'll wind up rolling themselves over. So if your left leg's in the door, make sure that we're opening that hip to get the presentation as we're stepping off.
That's right. Um, all right. So I did want to show what a 678 we've talked about the setup in the door for 1 through 5, but we haven't really talked through 678. And this is usually where we have the most issues because it is very crowded and we realize that, but it can be done very successfully. Basically, what we want is to make sure that we're not crowding the back. This person over here is number 8. And you see how much space they have. They also have the right hand on the bar, very important for presentation purposes and to be able to launch with the left side of their body down and the right side up. If we have the bar the other way, if we have the bar with our left, then now we have to drop all of that left flank to be able to launch in that sideways position that we were talking about, right? So we're essentially have number 6 against the fuselage, not even, they have very, very little space in the door. And then we're giving the priority to the person on the back so they can exit successfully. And we're not jamming the back when we launch, because when we launch, we're going to go in this direction no matter what. And we try to aim to be for the front of the door. But it happens very often that we end up jamming the person, the person right here. Right. And so the more out and the more forward we are, the more it allows everybody else to get stuck up. This is person number 10, 678 number 10. This is person number 10, and this is person number 11. We are actually able to fit 3 people, 1, 2, and 3 across the Otter. Now I'm going to show you an example where we don't do that. And this is person number 10. There is actually no, this is person number 8. You can see that they have their elbow down here, and this is person number 10, which means that 11 is already like much farther out. They don't have the same placement that the person in the prior picture was showing, and this person is not nearly as far out as we would want them to. There's a couple of reasons why that's happening. Number 1 is there's not a ton of space here with the arms of the people outside, but this person number 7, is not leaving enough space for person number 8. So we want to make sure that we prioritize the back of the door and then front, so that they can have a good exit and that we don't jam the moment of launch.
And just like Gorka said, that they have positive pressure from that front row of 3, almost that we're trying to get our helmet, maybe even some of our shoulders outside the door already. You know, where you're pushing on that person, or we don't even want to say pushing. We want to say we have positive pressure on the floating people, but we're ready to get off the aircraft and we're far enough outside. You know, a good setup of the first row of 3, I would be able to, if I was outside the aircraft, I could look down and see their helmets and their shoulders in the door.
Yep. And so
Excuse
if
me.
we were to exit properly, and this is actually this setup, that's what that person can exit like. It is this is a pretty good, there we have some placement issues with number 7. They should be a little bit higher, and number 6 they should be a little bit higher. But that right knee down and launching sideways is very well executed by number 8. And that's what we were going for. Okay, Doug, dive in exits.
Diving exits. The infamous diving exit, right? Everybody talks about this, and everybody's like, oh, I want to be last diver. I'm the best. Well, that doesn't always mean the same thing. So let's talk about diving exits. We're going to go through the same thing. Your airplane setup. We have a semi-squat stance with wide legs, especially those that are later divers, because guess what? The aircraft is going to move. You know, we have this huge setup. There is 10, 11, 12, 13 people in the door, and they all leave at one time, no matter how good the pilot is. You know, you have that much CG change. The aircraft is going to move if you're a later diver. So we want to be ready for that movement. And if we have a wider stance, then we can absorb that as we're moving closer to the door. We want to have a kind of a gentle pressure on the person in front of us. And we have the same thing, arms up on the rig of the person in front of us. That does two things for us when we're diving. One, it keeps us close to that person in front of us. And two, it acts as a protection mechanism when we're leaving the aircraft. Because if I'm close enough to that person as I'm diving and they go like this, I want to make sure that I don't get kicked in the chin or the face. And then it also helps me with presentation as I'm leaving the aircraft. So we're in a semi squat. We have our shoulders over top of our hips. We have a wider stance as we're in the aircraft setup. And then we have that gentle pressure forward. Now, we don't want to overrun the person in front of us, but we don't want to be caught on our heels and add time or distance between the person in front of me. So as we're leaving the airplane, we're jumping through the door and we're aiming for the front of the door.
This is tailgate though.
This is for the tailgate. Okay.
Yeah.
Diving exits for the tailgate. Boom, just like that. So if you're standing like this, and the aircraft is flying in this direction, remember that we have to present. So as I'm moving through the aircraft, I want to get into this position, like I'm diving into a swimming pool. My arms are up, just like Orca talked about. My arms are going to catch the wind, and then I'm going to catch that throw as I jump off the back of the tailgate. Very commonly, the first couple of rows of divers will actually look up too early and they will cut themselves in relation to the base. So as I'm catching the throw and I've left the aircraft, so here we go, jump through the tailgate, catch the wind like this. I want to keep my head down so that I continue to get that throw. If I look up too early, I'm going to cut myself in and then I'm going to be low from the get-go. Just like Gorka has right here, you were using that slow fall position to catch the throw of the aircraft and sail. Yes, we know that we're not actually like sailing, but we want to get that good presentation as we're stepping off the tailgate so that we can put ourselves into a better stadium position as we're exiting a tailgate aircraft for diving. So you can see in this position.
Oops, sorry. Continue.
It's okay. This is your first row. This is the second row of 3 diving, stepping off the aircraft. Arms up, chins down, neutral position, getting that full half of a flip to get presented into the relative wind as we're stepping off the tailgate. And then you can see off to the corner of the screen, there would be the base. So presentation, make sure that we get that good half of a flip like you're diving into a swimming pool as we're catching that the relative wind to stay presented. And then this will be a video of that.
Mm-hmm.
So see it as they're stepping off, they're getting their head down, catching the wind, and then they'll make their turn after they present to find the base. Can you play that one more earlier?
Mm-hmm.
Let's start.
One more time.
Yep. There we go. Just like that. Catch the presentation, make your turn to find the base.
All right. We also have a POV. What does the exit look like if I'm the one?
This is a later diver POV exit. So you can see how far back they are in the tailgate. This is a very common question that we get. What is it going to look like? So it's going to be the same thought here. We're standing, we're going to run, we're going to catch the wind, make that front flip move. And then you're going to see the base will now come into vision out in front. But if we run that back, so it's very, very tight. You can see everybody's got their hands on the rig of the person in front of them. There's the break in the line. You'll see the floaters start to leave. And then this is what you look like. You actually wind up seeing the aircraft, the lead aircraft and the trail aircraft as you have good presentation. That means now I've presented very well into relative wind. You can see all of these people that have good presentation. dive, 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 and then you'll start to see the base come into view right there. So as you step off as a diver from a tailgate, you may not be able to see the base initially, and that's okay, right? You're going to see the line of people and everybody moving towards the base in that direction. But the key concept, you are standing vertical, essentially as the aircraft is flying in this direction with your back to the relative wind. As you step off the aircraft, we need to make that rotation so that we get our hips and our shoulders into the relative wind, arms up, just like we talked about, catch the good presentation, and then make your move into the dive position to find the base.
Yeah, you will hear us talk about these three things: PII, present, identify, and and intercept. Make sure that if you're a late diver out of a tailgate, make sure that you respect the present part enough, that you're not moving into identifying and trying to find the base sooner than you should. So that's just another way of saying it. Okay, let's move on to otter diving.
Side door aircraft. Same thing. We have the wider stance, semi-squat position, gentle pressure forward through the exit in leaving the door. A lot of the time, I will see people try to take an additional step closer to the door. That one adds time and distance, and then two actually affects their presentation into the relative wind. So as you're stepping forward, we want to make sure, or stepping through the door, I will say it doesn't matter which foot you leave on if you are a later diver 13 through 22, because the more important thing is as I'm coming out the door, I'm making sure that my right side is staying high, I have good presentation, and then as I step out, so if I'm running, as I step out like this, presenting my right side high to the relative wind to then make my dive through the door. You want to aim for the front of the door as you're leaving the aircraft. And again, you don't need to be right on the door frame to exit the aircraft. Right? You can leave from farther back in the door as long as we're targeting the front of the door and we have the same thought that I'm making sure my right side stays high as I'm leaving the aircraft and getting good presentation as I make my dive.
So we actually have an inside video of what that should look like. Because normally most of the videos that you've seen on a diving exit, you've seen from the outside, the videographer's point of view. And we started using these videos in our camps, and we've had a really good positive response. Want me to play it again?
Yeah, it's a little choppy, so you may have to play it one more time. Unless you're like Igor and you decide to geek the camera on the way out. But you can see how everybody's leaving farther back in the door. They're not too concerned about that. Arms are up to protect themselves as they're leaving. Making sure that last person has a very good presentation there.
The other thing that I wanted to comment about this video is that you see that there isn't a ton of separation from anybody. There is no gaps. Is what After we get the initial like 11 people out, it's all single file, and we're using that break that we talked about between the two rows, and pretty much like it's one person after the other. We actually exit this aircraft in just about 4 seconds, which is a tremendous accomplishment. It is not easy to do, but we do it because our placement is correct, and our timing is correct.
Yep.
Very efficient.
And just like Gorka said, the reason that it can be exited that quickly is twofold. One, it's the setup in the door. Be as close to that person as you can be in front of you. And then also in the Chicago aircraft or aircraft that don't have benches, or if they have side benches and we can put both benches up, that's when we can add that split diver line. So that's something that may not be happening all the time, but that is something that we work with. And just like Gorka said, the theory behind that is those last 5 people are much closer to the door initially. So we minimize the distance of travel that they have to go to reach the door, because in that distance of travel, that's when separation starts to occur. So if we can bring those whole 4 or 5 people, 6 feet closer to the door, and they don't have to make those additional steps, then it will add to efficiency through the exit. And we have been able to consistently get 4 or sub 4 second Otter exits with this theory, with this practice.
All right, let's move on to base exits. And with that, we're gonna
Base.
wrap it up.
All right. So the base. There, we have multiple different bases that will come out, four-way star, four-way diamond, a four-way donut, a six-way star, an eight-way star. You can see an eight-way donut, in-outs, things like that. The shapes and the sizes of the base is going to affect their exit as it comes off the aircraft. So an eight-way chunk is going to look like it has a little bit more sail as it comes off the airplane than a four-way would, or a single person setting line of flight, something like that. We use in our events from a side door aircraft, we will primarily use a diamond as it comes out and transition that into a star. A star and a diamond will have a little bit of a better, can have an easier time setting fall rate than a donut would. And then as we move out, the fall rate stays pretty much consistent, but the sizes and the shapes of the base can affect their placement out the door, and then the ability to set and continue to set a good fall rate. Okay, so the responsibilities. This is very key. Many people think they get stuck in the base and they're like, oh, the base sucks. Actually, the base is the most important part of the formation. The responsibilities of the base is to set a consistent fall rate. We need to maintain the heading in relation to the line of flight. We have to preserve the base shape, because if the base shape changes at all, then it's going to affect the radials of the people farther out in the formation. And then it has to absorb, right? If there's any kind of wave or any kind of movement that comes through, the base's job is to stop that energy and save the rest of the formation on the other side. And then also, you guys, if your skill is there, then you can mirror the break off signaling by kicking your legs to help with the break off. So here's the eight-way. This is what the eight-way chunk would look like coming off of a lead tailgate. This is the standard eight-way chunk that we use. And then that gets broken up into an eight-way star, as you can see there.
Let's see an example of a video.
And there you can see as it's stepping off. We want to have that base go from this orientation to this orientation. And then the person in the frame right there would be the super floater, and we'll talk about that person in another chapter. But this is what we want to see as we have that eight-way chunk stepping off the aircraft.
Yeah, so one thing that I wanted to add on the technique of exiting here, we actually want to have, we don't really set up on a diagonal. These four people that are taking, they're actually taking leg straps of a sort of the four-way. So we have the organizer setting up line of flight here, and then two jumpers across, and then two people sort of in a diagonal holding on to the leg straps of the people that are next to them. But we actually set up in the door as three floaters in a floating position, 1, 2, and 3, looking straight, like hips square towards the looking towards the pilot, and then three divers, and then it naturally just takes that that shape when you launch it. But the technique is more of a diving versus floating. It's just that you're doing it with grips, but it's very, very similar. The technique for those that are across is a little bit different. It's essentially side. It's more of a side door type of exit. Is more left side down or right side down, depending on which side you are on. And then, but still, same ideals, right? Presentation is key. Present your belly to the relative wind. Timing and placement. So nothing really changes the theory, but it's just that the different slots require a slightly different way to think about it.
Just like Orca said, the three people standing on the back of the tailgate were just stepping straight backwards. The three people on the diving side thinking about that rotation to get presentation as they're coming off the door. And the key is that everybody's moving together. That's the big thing. We want to move that whole 8 people off the tailgate at the same time.
Timing. Okay, six
Timing.
way.
Six-way is just like an 8-way. Instead of having the two people in facing in the star, it's just a pin with grips around the outside. Again, key concept here is that everybody's moving together. In this orientation, we just have the row of 3 floaters stepping off and then the row of 3 divers, and we're all moving straight backwards off the tailgate together. So that's what it would look like. That's it in free fall, and then this is what it's going to look like leaving the aircraft.
Okay. And then we have a 4-way.
So here is the 4-way diamond coming off the Otter. As you can see, there is the 2 organizers up and down line of flight. You'd have 1 person outside the aircraft and the 3 people inside the aircraft. We use this diamond, and then sometimes we will roll it into a star to transition. And then you can see the 4-way, that's a diamond base in that picture there, not a star base, but it's close enough. But we use this in side door aircraft. We will also step a 4-way star off in a tailgate aircraft as well.
And that's the video that we have here.
Yep. So if we're using a 4-way star in a tailgate, we usually have a row of floaters behind them. And we have the same concept. You know, in a 4-way star, we'll have 2 people on the floating side and 2 people on the diving side stepping off, and then it usually rotates itself to put 1 person up line of flight and 1 person down line of flight. But all of these key concepts are the same, that everybody is stepping off together, we're moving together, and we're thinking about the presentation of our position as we're stepping off either the tailgate or the side door aircraft.
And that is a wrap up. Thank you very much for staying with us for this longer chapter. The next one will be at what do we do after exits? You know, how do we approach the formation? Let us know if you have any questions in the comment section below. And stay safe. Blue skies.
Thanks, guys. See you in the next one.